Michigan is a battleground state. And so we're not delusional in terms of what that means for our families and our community. I have seen divides in my local community, and sometimes I have a fear of if it's repairable. And I think what gives me hope is knowing that I can share what Undivided does nationally, but I can also share now what we're doing locally with this civic engagement initiative. My name is Stephanie Kreider, and I am a hub team leader in Michigan for Undivided. I am also one of the local and national facilitators, and I am currently the director for the Civic Engagement Initiative in Michigan as well. I've been working with Undivided for a couple of years now. I actually started out as a participant in a Living Undivided cohort. When I was approached about attending a 6-week cohort, I was in the midst of doing a lot of racial justice work, really taxing work. And so at that point, I didn't know if I wanted to engage in something else that would be emotionally draining and maybe even traumatic. I almost missed my blessing, is what I say. There are so many Black women my age and younger who are just dying suddenly. I'm one of thousands of people who has been lied on, who has lost their job because of racism. My financial legacy for my family has been altered because of the way society is. Racism has contributed to an enormous amount of stress that shows up in our bodies. The burden is so heavy, and I think people they don't know. They don't get it. It hurts because we don't really know how to articulate what that feels like. It is grieving in a way that you cannot describe. Like there's a pain inside of your body that you can't describe. I can't take off the color of my skin. I can't magically decide one day that this is not something that I want to talk about or engage in. Like I'm thrust into it whether I want to be or not. That's our reality. And it takes a toll. I was raised as a Black woman to be strong. And I was told at times not to show weakness through showing my tears. And I feel like Undivided has created a space that gives me permission to be completely vulnerable and to know that there's power in my tears and that I don't need to feel ashamed. I don't need to feel like I'm less than, but I can feel free to shed a tear that not only frees me, but it also frees other people in the process. We talk a lot about racial solidarity and what racial justice looks like, but we don't often talk about racial healing. And so what I found is that there's a space for me to go to and not just pour out of myself, but there's a place where people were pouring into me. And I was able to hear stories, and I was able to share in a way that actually felt like it was therapeutic and like I received some healing from that. We often don't give people space to share their story, but Undivided has taught us a way of being able to lean in and share a story and have that confidence enough that when you share an opposing viewpoint, that I'm not shaken. My foundation is still there, and that if I use the reflective listening, if I use my empathy training, I can lean in with curiosity and say, you know, I never thought about that from that perspective. Can you share more with me? And it's a very different way of approaching people from the circles that I've been around. There's no demonizing. And what I find is that if I start out with my story and I dig deep and I'm vulnerable, it opens the door for them to be vulnerable and share things they never thought they would say. I am unapologetically a Black woman. I am unapologetically an activist. I am unapologetically a Protestant Christian. And what that means for me is that the two greatest commandments, love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, right? Love your neighbor. Like that has caused me to wrestle so many nights with what that means for me with my everyday life and how I'm gonna show up in spaces. And Undivided gave me a confidence to show up in a very different way. What Undivided also did was teach me how to have mercy and grace in situations in ways that I didn't have before. As a facilitator, I was paired with a baby boomer, white male Christian leader in our community. And what I began to realize is that my friends, my neighbors, community members would never see my friend enter a room as a white man who is a Christian in this polarized society and realize that he's an ally and he's someone who loves Jesus and he loves them. And so my heart softened for his story. And I realized that the story of what Black and brown people go through should not be the only story, right, that is shown through Undivided, through when we share. And I remind people that there are people in rural communities who have a dire need and they don't have a voice. And part of it is because we're not giving them voice and we're not listening to their story because we think they don't matter. If you claim to love God, you love your neighbor. And that means that biblically, if I love my neighbor, I should have a desire to be in proximity to my neighbor. I should have a desire to be a voice for my neighbor. I should have a desire to fight for those things that are needed in this person's family, in their personal life, in their community, in the workplace, in the church, in the evangelical church. You know, when we talk about things that are political and people dismiss it because politics can be nasty, right? But politics is really about policy. And how can we lean into work civically? How do we lean into work that can make impact in people's lives? One of the things that we're doing right now in Michigan is that we are training up leaders across the state. We are providing free training to help people understand the power of their story. We're training them on reflective listening, how to listen for the emotion and the thought that someone is sharing, how to lean in with curiosity and empathy when they engage people so that we can have more civil discourse as we do this work. And teaching people, and not just people, but teaching congregations about relational organizing so that we can create a sustainable initiative that creates ongoing relationship building and ongoing dialogue that I hope will depolarize the state of Michigan. And it is something that so many people have been asking for and craving. And so we're excited about being able to do that work. In this polarized environment, it is essential, it is critical for us to begin to have dialogue with one another and meet people where they are and let them know that it is okay to show up as your authentic self, just as you are. I don't need you to be in lockstep and for us to agree 100% of the time. I just need to really hear your story and understand where you're coming from and find a common ground so that we can figure out how to build that relationship and jointly make an impact in our community.